Alright guys, so once again Elon Musk has the internet talking as he has come out and slammed Twitter for not adhering to the principles of free speech. Now, Elon Musk has been a very kind of outspoken person when it comes to political and social issues lately. As the tech billionaire, it seems like he doesn't really like what he's saying, right, in terms of what is going on from our government and some of these tech companies. These tech companies whom are run by some of his colleagues. Okay, recently Twitter was run by Jack Dorsey until he decided to step down. And it's always interesting to see people like Elon Musk come out and criticize his colleagues. Okay, whether that's Jeff Bezos or a company like Twitter that's run by somebody like Jack Dorsey, or even going out to politicians like Joe Biden, which Elon Musk has done. He's definitely over time become more of a political figure and speaking out on the issues that matter. And because of that, I think Elon has really elevated his profile and his status, not just as a tech entrepreneur, but just as a person of influence, right? When Elon talks, people listen, okay? Because when he says stuff, he usually says it in a meaningful way. The guy is not known to be the one to waste words, right? He's not the one to be talking just to talk. If he says something, he means it. And because he's a tech billionaire genius, basically, a lot of people take his word to mean something, right? So when Elon Musk comes out here and questions Twitter in regards to whether or not they are adhering to the principles of free speech, I think that's kind of a big deal. And somebody like Elon Musk, who has a whole lot of resources, he could technically do something about the problem, right? Because there's a lot of people like me that complain about Twitter and these platforms censoring people, specifically when it comes to political censorship, but I can't really do anything about it, okay? Because I'm not a tech billionaire, right? However, Elon Musk can, because he could actually buy Twitter, okay? And because of Elon Musk's criticisms of Twitter, there's been rumors speculating that he may buy Twitter. He, again, most certainly can. Twitter's market cap is on like 30 billion. Elon Musk is worth like 150 billion. So he could, even though, it would be difficult, but he definitely, theoretically could buy Twitter if he actually really wanted to. I don't think he would, but he could. And I want to talk about whether or not that would actually solve the problem here. But first, let's talk about this tweet, right? Because he put out a poll in which he says, free speech is essential to a functioning democracy. Do you believe Twitter vigorously adheres to this principle? Now, this poll had over 2 million votes, right? So, I mean, it's a pretty decent sample size, right? And 70% of people say no, while almost 30% of people say yes. Now, I'm surprised that 30% of people say yes. I think it's very clear that Twitter does not adhere to the principles of free speech. Or put it this way, they don't really care about the principles of free speech, right? They don't really care about the spirit of free speech, because the private company argument is technically correct, okay? Yes, these companies are not necessarily subject to the First Amendment. I get it. That's a government thing. However, that doesn't make it right and when they're against the spirit of free speech. When you become a de facto public square and you're censoring people based off their political opinions and you're not doing it equally on both sides, it's clear that you have a political bias. Yeah, that's a problem, because Twitter is a large enough platform that influences the outcome of things that matter, like elections, right? They influence public opinion. You have world leaders on Twitter that make official announcements via Twitter, okay? So with great power comes great responsibility. And Elon Musk, at the very least, seems to have great reach and influence, as he got over 2 million responses for this poll, 38,000 retweets, 150,000 some likes-ish. So he then goes to say the consequences of this poll will be important. Please vote carefully. Again, this is where the speculation is coming in here. Okay, like what does Elon actually mean by the consequences of this poll will be important? Please vote carefully. Like what is he saying? Is he actually going to act on this or what? We don't really know. But Andy No replied, and he says, where Twitter censors views or even factual statements in contravene of the U.S. First Amendment, it goes in favor of a partisan or leftist worldview. Democratic politicians know this, which is why they call on their connections to get content and people banned that hurt their side. I was out of characters, but to clarify, I was referring to the principle of the First Amendment. We should be disturbed and outraged that American governments are offloading censorship that they can't legally do to big tech as a workaround to the First Amendment. Yeah, he's 100% right about that, right? Because what we're seeing here is that the government is basically going to Twitter and saying, hey, these opinions we don't like, therefore you should censor those opinions. And particularly this happened when it came to the pandemic, right? Opinions about the virus or the vaccine that Democrats didn't like, they went to Twitter, they went to big tech and like, why are you not doing more about this so-called misinformation, right? You should be doing more. And that has prompted these companies to do more censorship and to not let people have open debate and discussion about the pandemic. Even though what the Democrats were pushing in the mainstream liberal narrative wasn't necessarily true, and that the science actually did evolve over time to show that, hey, what they were saying wasn't necessarily true. It didn't matter. If you said something that was outside of the mainstream point of view at the time, you were subject to be erased from Twitter, right? Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Cernovich says, if you're a leftist making death threats against conservatives or organizing riots, Twitter respects your freedom of speech. Twitter also respects the freedom of speech for media hoaxes while banning the New York Post for reporting truthful information about Democrats. Yeah, I think that the New York Post and the Hunter Biden story is the clearest example of the overt political bias when it comes to censorship. Listen, honestly, I wouldn't have all that much to say about Twitter censoring people if it was done equally, right? If it was something that was done equal on both sides, like for example, you know, people that make claims about the 2020 election, if Twitter came out and said, hey, we're censoring anybody who makes any claims about elections, and that also includes the Democrats' claims about elections, which they are making claims, the same claims that people on the right were making about election 2020. If they said we're going to censor anybody that does that, at the end of the day, I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't be for it, but I couldn't really complain that much because it's been done on both sides. It's been done equally. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening is that you're saying censorship based off political bias. Okay? And Twitter censoring that Hunter Biden story because it hurt the Democrats is a prime example of that. We all know why they did it. Please buy Twitter, says Bridget Gabriel. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of opinions on this. And then Elon Musk follows up and he says, given that Twitter serves as a de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. What should be done? And then he says, is a new platform needed? So I think this is an interesting question because there's been a whole lot of new platforms that have come out to try to challenge Twitter. However, the problem is the network effect, right? It's the effect of, well, Twitter has this brand that's so strong that people want to be on that platform. Like, that is the platform to be on, right? So when you're trying to start a new platform, it's difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because we all know, like I stated, that Twitter is censoring people based off politics, okay? So what happens is that the people that are actually getting censored for Twitter the most, and I'm not saying people on the left don't get censored for Twitter, they definitely do. When they say opinions that are held by people on the right, they will get censored. What happens is that you're kicking off a bunch of people that happen to be conservatives. So what happens is that these new platforms get this stigma of, well, this platform is for the extremists, right? They're for the right-wing extremists that, you know, are hateful and white supremacists and all the other stuff, right? So all those people go to a platform like Gab or whatever. That's the way those platforms are seen, right? Those platforms are automatically stigmatized. The only way a new platform could work is if everybody gets on the platform. What makes Twitter great, right, so to speak, is the fact that you have both sides on the platform, okay? That's what makes it great. If you just have a platform where there's only one side and you don't have a difference of opinion, then there's no point, because when you put out something, everybody that sees what you put out, they already agree with you. People put out opinions because they want people who don't necessarily agree with them to see those opinions, right? It's boring when everybody agrees with you, right? So that's the issue with these new platforms starting up, is that you're putting a whole lot of people that are going to these platforms have the same type of ideology, and that's a problem. That's an issue. Cernovich says, by Twitter. Eric Weinstein says, we need to invent something that fills this space that hasn't existed yet. There are unfortunately several challenges that have prevented every previous attempt from working. This is very much an analytic problem of a particular kind. It's not just a lack of desire. Good luck. Yeah, there's a whole lot of issues, right? There's a whole lot of issues. I mean, it's hard to start a company like Twitter and to, again, have that network effect in which everybody's going to want to be on the platform. Lex Friedman says, yes, I can build it. It must be done. Wall Street Bet says just buy Twitter. Dave Rubin says maybe buying Twitter to clean it up makes sense, but maybe letting it die is best. Rumble Video has the infrastructure and video capability. On Locals has the crowdfunding and community building. PT is on Rumble. I think you started something with him way back when. All right, so I think I agree with Dave Rubin here. I think it's best to let Twitter die, right? And I think that that's likely what would happen if Twitter keeps going down this route of censorship, especially based off political opinions, right? Because eventually they're going to get a lot of the same people. And we've seen that happen when it comes to the whole Leah Thomas thing. If you literally come out here and say man is a man, a woman is a woman, okay, or you know, state basic facts about biology, you're now being censored on Twitter. That is going a little bit too far, because I guarantee you, if you poll most of America, they probably tell you that, Leah Thomas should not be competing against biological women, okay? Most people agree with that. What was going to happen is that they're going to start censoring opinions that most people agree with, and then that's what's going to turn a lot of people off from the platform. So I don't necessarily think that Elon Musk needs to buy Twitter, right, per se, because even if he bought Twitter, the problem is not necessarily Twitter in and of itself, but it's really the employees that work at Twitter, right? It's the people on the ground level that are enforcing the rules. It's the same problem at all these tech companies. It's the same problem at Facebook, which, by the way, is actually dying, right? Like, Facebook is dying, right? That's why they had to rebrand as Meta, right? They're going in a different direction because Mark Zuckerberg realizes that the writing is on the wall for that platform, right? Again, you saw MySpace die. It happens. It happens over time. But what I'm saying is that the problem is the people that actually work at those social media platforms, right? Again, YouTube got the same problem. Facebook, Twitter, they all got the same problem, okay? Because you have people on the ground level that do enforce these rules more strictly than they actually should. They're making the decisions to platform and deplatform people, and they do it based off their political opinions. Now, I think Twitter is more overtly politically biased than a platform like YouTube. But again, regardless, it's definitely an issue, right? So I think Elon Musk is definitely starting an interesting conversation. I don't know if buying Twitter is necessarily the answer, but in the long run, I think that Twitter will suffer the consequences of the overt censorship. As you know, there are new platforms that are starting up, and it might not necessarily be a Twitter clone that does Twitter in. It might be a new platform that's not necessarily trying to be a Twitter clone. It could be a platform that does something even better than Twitter, something different than Twitter that basically has the same effect, but people are attracted to because it does it in a better way. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.